There are maybe 4 seats up front, should anybody feel so inclined, no pressure. So today's panel is around modernizing legacy systems. And our panelists today are Supriya Kumari, who is the Director of Digital Strategy at SGI Canada, and Chris Long, who is the Global VP of Banking and Financial Services at Altair. So when I was approached by the content manager to do this forum, I was intrigued because sometimes working in the public sector, the tech debt that follows you is quite heavy. And I think this panel is a really interesting take on what modernization of that technology is, especially with an innovation type of eye. And when I met with these 2 panelists before, intriguingly enough, the first topic that arose from our conversation is what exactly is modernization? And maybe, Supriya, I'll go with you first, if you want to give your take.
For sure. Hey everyone, good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here. When it comes to modernization, in the literal sense, it means you're replacing or updating your aging technologies, your processes, your platforms, but to make them more agile, customer-centric, secure, and efficient. But I think more than just upgrading tech, it also means how you make your data usable, how you make systems interoperable, how you make the underlying architecture flexible, and how you're rethinking your outdated processes and procedures. So for me, I think it's more than just an upgrade. It's when a system enables continuous change, improves itself. If we talk about some concrete examples taken at the federal level, so Government of Canada has this cloud adoption strategy, the application hosting strategy, which were primarily developed for government entities to navigate their modernizing decisions and remediating technical debt.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well said. Chris, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, sure. In my experience, modernization is generally when there's a recognition that the expense of putting up with low, I want to say low grade, but perhaps outdated existing technology, and the expense of maintaining it is now meeting an inflection point where that money could be better spent at perhaps upgrading, taking advantage of various technological offerings that are new. And then as a consequence, freeing up budget and spend to actually pay for that upgrade. So it's really recognizing that there is a point of inflection where money or time or both could be saved by making some changes and doing it in an incremental way that makes fiscal sense.
Yeah, nicely said. And I was curious if either of you find modernization a means to just eradicate a broken process. So maybe you find that our leadership is not addressing what the true issue is. Instead, they're hoping a brand new piece of tech would just swoop in and fix it.
I'm happy to go first. I think modernization is absolutely a distraction if you approach it as a technology-first solution and not a strategy-driven transformation. Right, in a public setting, public sector setting, where you have data fragmented across departments, and you don't have your metadata strategy in place, you don't have your lineages in place, you have still the outdated data mindset and data culture. If you rush to implement an AI or rush to implement a hybrid cloud model without considering these factors in mind, it's absolutely a distraction. So it has to be tied to a long-term clear vision, roadmap, and strategy, and then you have to kind of build that broader momentum on how your strategy would take shape. What are you going to do first? So I think if done in a right way, you do it fine. Mm-hmm. If it's treated as a tech first, you're tying tech to a business problem and not the other ways, it's definitely not worth it.
Yeah, that's well said. I think that was a really interesting way that you phrased that, and actually wrote it down. Modernization is not a strategy for transformation, right? It's usually the use case first, which I think is what you're getting at, right? And then the technology after. Thanks.
I would add to that it is the recognition that change is necessary, but as you say, it's not a strategy. And then what? And oftentimes that there is various, depending on, the industry. I do work in cross-industry, although banking and financial services is probably where I've spent the most time. What options are there? And so my career has taken me through huge explosions of technology where modernization was really adopting Hadoop. So that was a thing for a while, where commodity-based hardware was the answer to the problem. And what was the problem? Well, we called it big data. And nowadays, big data gets thrown around as a term that means many different things. But there was a time when that meant you had a problem, that you didn't have the capacity to handle the data that you were storing. And then, it boils down to, okay, well, what realistically can I do as an operation or an organization, or that would appease my stakeholders in a fiscally responsible way that's proven, and not just the shiny new thing and the new way forward, which may be a risk.
Yeah, nicely said. I think that kind of goes into the next question, which is more around innovation, right? Because in the public sector, sometimes we see cool stuff that are out there, but we really need to understand how to deliver meaningful impact to the public sector, right? Do we really need to be the best at everything and drive the first-class innovation? So I'm interested on your perspective, Chris, if the push for AI innovation and integration is outpacing our ability to actually contribute to the public sector. Go ahead.
It's a healthy concern. I think we should all have that concern. The latest shiny new thing that I see across industry is generative AI and discussions around that. So what is generative AI doing for you? A lot of folks have high expectations. There are a lot of questions that people have. So what practically can it do? And it really depends on where your operation is. What does it do well? It acts as a very good search engine. It's very popular today, where it can be an interactive search engine, not just to you as a stakeholder using it or studying analytics, but something that you could expose perhaps through a website and have the chatbot to help perhaps a citizen navigate some government policy pages, examples like that. So there is some good there. But I believe that there's definitely a need to have an eye towards skepticism and say, okay, well, what is the risk? What can it do? And explore the different problems that these things can provide and how it can go off script. And so there is an element of adopting new technology just because it's in vogue and the new thing to do. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I've heard recently at a conference I was at, somebody compared it to the dot-com era, where everyone was rushing to adopt this new technology of e-commerce, and it was a bust. The stock markets took a hit, a lot of the telcos melted down, but there was a lot of good that came out of it, new infrastructure. And I think with this new generative AI thing, that seems to be the latest, what everyone is talking about. And I would say the extreme side of modernization, we find ourselves in a situation where this is perhaps the future, but not yet. And we can't take human beings out of the equation just yet. So move carefully, even though there's this temptation to say, wow, there's all these great things happening, and I have a fear of missing out.
Yeah, that's fair. FOMO is real. Supriya, kind of related to that, do you think people with this FOMO train of thought do AI use cases for optics as opposed to looking at the true business value instead?
This is well put, Sasha. I think, the world is hyper-focused on AI right now, and it's very politically very attractive to say that, we are using AI. But I think it's easier to announce, but really hard to scale when it comes to AI pilots. Oftentimes, our own vendors and data teams push, that we want to test this pilot AI project and, let's figure out how things look, but they don't have a solid plan to integrate it back into their systems or even evaluate the success. So when we talk about, I feel, different stakeholders, like if you're talking about a data leader, say, it might appear that so-and-so leader is forward-thinking or innovative. If you talk about vendors, or consultants. It's a case for them to win the pilot contract. We'll experiment and show the case studies and all that. For our own data teams, it might be beneficial to experiment and play with a new tool and learn a new model or two. But at the end of the day, we have to see what the long-term risk is. Is it ethically challenged? Do you have weak results coming up? Do you have enough guardrails in place which say we shouldn't be playing around with this tool because it kind of interjects with a lot of private and sensitive and PII data in place. So instead of having it just for optics, if we want to really make it impactful, I feel there are certain things that we should consider. More nuanced, more governance-based approach. I think number one, you should focus on your pilot scoping, like define your data sources. What are your use cases? What are your risks? Are you working very collaboratively with your privacy officers, with your program and delivery teams? Secondly, you do your pre-checks. Do you have data quality checks in place? Have you got your lineage sorted out? And before you train any model, do you have any metadata tagging in place? Third would, and the most important, I think, and I think it's also in the nascent stages, is an ethical review board of some sorts. Who is maintaining all that? What rigors are you following? Are you talking to your data stewards? Are you talking to your privacy and compliance teams? And I think lastly and most importantly, the scalability aspect. Like when you undertake this pilot project, do you even consider how it's going to fit onto your existing tech stack? Does it align to your align with your DevOps practices, or is there enough foundational work done for your data infrastructure and governance to support a broader deployment? So these things I think need to be considered before you say you have the shiny new toy or you're working on an AI pilot, to have the sound and groundwork done in a consistent manner.
Yeah, that's good. I love that your answer, Supriya, was grounded in reality, right? Look at the data sources you have today. These are things that can achieve. I think that's what will make sure that the project that you do work on is doable today, and you could possibly also measure the benefits. So that being said, because we're looking at things today, what are your opinions, Supriya, on infrastructure improvements? Do you think that we're moving too slow to facilitate AI?
So it really depends, right? So we are in an environment where you have to pace with compliance and trust and operational elements in mind, right? You cannot rush to implement an AI. And I also feel like there's a really good analogy that I came across, like treat it as renovating a hospital. You cannot shut down the hospital completely. You have to renovate it or modernize it wing by wing, floor by floor, until your critical operations are running parallelly. So similarly, I feel when you talk about these improvements in infrastructure, they have to be strategically sequenced, even though they are at a pace not at par with the private sector, say. So if you're doing some small intentional steps, like you are adding an API to connect your old legacy systems to newer digital platforms, or if you are moving your non-sensitive data to cloud first, keeping in mind that you have this hybrid cloud strategy in the background that's running, or you're focusing on cleaning and tagging your critical data sets for a responsible AI use, you're creating that foundation. I think the pace does not matter as you're doing the right things in the right way.
And Supriya, I'm curious, when you build out that plan of sequence of actions, how big is your roadmap that you're preparing for? Just because this incremental tech and AI tech is so quickly moving, do you build a roadmap 6 months, 1 year? I'm very intrigued by your latest answer.
No, for sure. I think the way you build your modernization roadmap, it depends on what the modernization goals would look like. We cannot say it has to be 3 months or 6 months or 10 years or 5 years, but it really depends on when you can address the pain areas and deliver quick wins, so that it builds momentum for the broader transformation. As an example, if you're early in your modernization journey, say you're just starting out afresh, you would need to have foundational work done, which does not happen in a month. It might take 6 to 8 months. But if you're a little more ahead or in the maturity scale, you are modernizing your existing data layers, which you already have a solid foundation for. it might not take as much of a time as you would anticipate, like a 6 month or an 8 month. It might be a 3 month sprint. And now I think all of us know the value add that an agile delivery model does, or the speed to market happens when you work consistently, revamping your strategies and kind of pushing products out to the market to see and test and get that feedback. So it really depends on what the modernization goal is and where you are on the maturity scale.
Yeah, that's interesting and nicely said. Thanks for answering that. So, Chris, some people say that, mainframe technologies are here to stay. But as you know, as we're trying to incorporate innovation and AI, cloud is coming up more and more. So, how do we integrate with like cloud native foundations?
Well, so that's an excellent question, and it's a large question. Mainframes, where are they used? Mostly in most of the data that's processed today happens just if you look at the sheer numbers on mainframes. Mainframes are not going away. They're actually part of modernization for a lot of mostly banks and insurance companies that I've dealt with. There's probably government use cases that I'm not too familiar with. But so I guess the first question is, why cloud? Why would you move to cloud? And most of the answers I get is to centralize IT, centralize data, having a method to keep things more security, and making that move. Although generally when I see that, the step isn't really right to cloud. There's multiple steps, so a phased approach. Like we're talking about modernization, how long would it take? Generally, it's going to happen in phases. There's going to be milestones. Moving from a mainframe to a more distributed type architecture, which I have worked on a few projects where we've done that. It's a stepping stone to cloud. So taking ownership of data, reconfiguring data into more modern sources. Usually on mainframe, that would be DB2 for IBM. But now we're looking at people migrating that to like a Snowflake offering or a cloud service for the data, but then keeping the logic in-house and moving more in a measured approach with the ultimate goal, if cloud. But I think, we've talked about how cloud itself, I can't remember having a conversation where there was like, we want to move to cloud. It's generally some element of moving to cloud, some hybrid of that, private cloud, or some combination of both. So I find that when I first heard about mainframes that were making a comeback, and that's what the data was telling us, and we look at the data, I thought, well, geez, that's really the old end of the spectrum. Like in my head, I'm thinking of this iron box in the basement somewhere with cobwebs on it, and this is the mainframe. But then I went to a few conferences recently, like within the last couple of years, and there's a lot of young people, and there's a lot of very modern-looking machines, something that you would see and you expect in a sci-fi movie. These new machines. So the question, I guess it really boils down to, do you need to move to cloud and why? And does the first thing you would need to consider is you're going to give up the processing power of a mainframe. Will you get that in cloud? And will you get that from those distributed systems? And if the answer is yes, then it might make more sense to do so. It might be more cost effective. And so I think when we began today, I wanted to say, does it make sense? Is there a way to actually increase your amount of savings to fund this kind of project, fund this kind of migration? And if the answer is yes, then I would do that. But if the answer is, no, what does cloud give you? And generally the argument there could be it gives you elasticity in your business and perhaps the opportunity to centralize things. But it's not clear. I guess, it boils down to a measured, phased approach.
Yeah, well said. I think it's interesting because we at OLG are also investigating, right, this incremental phased approach. And I'm intrigued on if you think doing it in incremental little phases is actually riskier, right? Because tech is moving very quickly. You're going to have some data here, other data here, and you have these little milestones you're meeting. So what do you think, Supriya? Do you think there's risk in doing it in smaller steps?
I think incrementalism is not inherently risky or bad. I think it's actually most often the correct and scalable path. It depends on how you're doing. right? Like if you are not tying your incremental strategy to a clear long-term vision on how you foresee your modernization efforts to look like, I think that's where the riskiness begins. But if you're tying it to a long-term strategy which you're constantly assessing, you're revamping, you're taking your lessons learned and tweaking, and you do have an end goal in mind, I think that's where we are doing incrementalism right. So I don't think it's inherently wrong. I think that's the right way to go, especially in our setting where we work. Public sector companies or crown corporations. Like I mentioned, the data is spread across different systems, across different legacy systems and different departments. You still don't have a lot of foundational work done. Your data policies are either not mature or they're still evolving. There's a change resistant mindset. You don't have enough data literacy in the organization. There are some of these foundational things, if we are tackling bit by bit, then I think it makes sense. For example, you can start with small incremental strategic projects where you're piloting, say, metadata standards, or you're improving your data lineage, or you're cleaning your CDEs, your critical data elements, to make a place ready for more advanced analytical tooling that will come in eventually. So when you're doing it in the right rigor, I think the risk significantly dwindles. But if you're thinking that we have to implement it in a big bang, big bang transformation, everything gets done and done, I think that's when the problem arises. So it has to be done in a small measured step, tying it to what you want to do in the long term. It's more like asking, what are your short-term career goals and what your long-term career goals are. You don't know how you'll get there, but you know somewhere that you will work towards it. So.
Yeah, nicely said. And I think you kind of touched on where we're going next, which is making sure our teams or our senior leadership don't lose trust in us when we're trying to have these small incremental changes. Is there anything you wanted to add to ensure that the team doesn't lose momentum as they undergo this modernization project?
Sure. I mean, I can give an example for my own firm, SGI Canada. And, the data is out and about in annual reports. If you look at the annual reports, the story is still there. So like other public insurers, we, operate on legacy systems, we also have our in-house core systems which support the claim lifecycle, a claim management lifecycle, right from intake to adjudication to payments. We're also tied to policy and billing modules. But a few years ago, we undertook this multi-year transformation program, wherein we are collaborating with Guidewire, which is again a cloud-based insurance platform. Now everything was built incrementally, module by module, and then you tend to coexist until you plan your decommissioning of the legacy systems over time. But I think in the background, you have to show quick wins, quick value adds, and solve for the immediate pain areas. So in the background, we're focusing on investing in data governance. We're integrating our systems. We're making sure we rebuild the core business logic, not operate on the older workflows that we have. It's not a lift and shift or a copy and paste. It's like redesigning our own fundamental business framework that we had. Along with all of that, I think the most important part is, in an organization, the most cherished assets are human capital or resources. So you need to have a proper change management strategy to bring people on board. That also reduces transformation fatigue a lot and kind of bridges the gap between what you want to do in the short term versus how you see yourself going in the longer term. So that's how we did it, and we're still marching ahead, moving forward. But I think if you think about short and long, specifically, it has to be tied to quick wins in the sense that, for example, if you want to improve your service delivery, build your short digital layers, but in the background you have, say, the hybrid cloud approach that you want to go ahead with. That is still running in the background. That you're still planning for it.
So, Supriya, I heard you mention, these quick wins, right? And with incrementality, quick wins is certainly what you will see, right? Which is all good. But Chris, do you ever see quick wins, maybe setting unrealistic expectations for what people can deliver, especially for the public sector?
Yeah, well, so part of your strategy is to please your stakeholders. And so the executive sponsorship or those that are, I don't know, above you in the org chart that are going to eventually weigh in on how you're doing should be part of your strategy. And so, it might make sense to organize yourself so that you can get some quick wins early on and win over support, because without support, you could end up stalling or being dead in the water. But ultimately, I mean, the examples I see are around moving from legacy systems, and it almost always means some sort of recalibration of how data is stored, how data is used. Mostly where I spend my time is the next step. And so what does that give you? It gives you descriptive analytics. But what are the high value things that you can get out of that data? And it generally evolves into the world of predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics and generative analytics. And so those things follow on. And so I would try and organize my project to sort of address those things, because like it or not, that's what's being talked about at the high level, these more advanced, I really find myself hesitant to use the term AI because it's so convoluted nowadays, but ultimately that's one term that you're going to have to include when you're talking about your next steps, for sure.
Yeah, nice. We'll just close up with one last question for you, Chris. Do you think that the public sector is perhaps too focused on integration and not enough on transformation?
Well, I don't, when thinking about that question, I always think of, I've heard some examples today as well. How do we integrate our Microsoft Access database better with our Excel data sheets in this other area? And I always find myself, when I hear that, thinking, well, maybe this is an opportunity to, as you say, become less focused on the minutia of that and look for an overall solution. So, it's part of the theme today, modernization, but trying to weigh, all the changes that would have to take in place. So not just adopting a new technology, but also change management and upskilling. I talked to a few people today who said, we don't know how to program in that language, or I want to hire a team of people and start doing all of this in Python, or some other open source strategy, which can be high risk and offer a lot of movement. But ultimately, it's something that has to be done with caution.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I think we heard quite a few good pieces of info so far. Execute with incrementality. Maybe instead of a roadmap, have the milestones that you want to achieve based on reality today. So maybe Supriya, just as a closing remark, could you say how do we know that our modernization was successful? What is the metric for that?
So when you say, my modernization efforts have been successful, it means you've really thought through your underlying operating model, you're using your modern data practices and platform. But again, depending on how you want the modernization goal to pan out, there are a bunch of KPIs or critical performance indicators, key performance indicators that you would be using in your organization. And I know it's different for different people, but I think first and foremost, how your financial efficiency looks like how are you tracking your cost effectiveness and sustainability. The second aspect would be, again, operational performance, like what's your system uptime, how long are you able to keep your systems up and running, what's the service delivery time. Yet again, I think it would be maybe the scalability aspect, improved findability and trust in data. Like, do you have your data quality indicators in place? For example, what's the percentage of users that are using these data sets from certified data catalogs? What's the data usability look like? So yeah, I think these are the key performance indicators that I've come across in my organization and some previous organizations which I was part of. But again, it gets tweaked a little bit depending on the goals that you're targeting and the measurements that you're focusing for a particular stakeholder group.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks for sharing that. We're almost out of time, but I will take one quick question. If not, you guys could bug them. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. Looking back on both of your, where you've come in your modernization journeys, what's one area or decision or piece that when you look back on it, you would have done differently?
Well, I think that probably I would have not jumped ahead the new shiny thing. So I would be a little bit more reflective and move a little more slowly as I have in the past. I do regret moving too quickly and adopting technology too fast in some cases.
Yeah, I'd add change management efforts to that as well, because I think oftentimes organizations don't prioritize that, and in terms of how it's taken by different set of audiences, like how your employees would react to a change versus how a leadership reacts to a change is completely different. So if you don't have that in place, I think it just calls for more trouble.
Yeah, nicely said. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Supriya and Chris. A great panel.
Thank you.
you.